Hey team, this is Coach Brandon with 1780 Fitness and Martial Arts and the United States Krav Maga Association. Today we're going to talk about the fight or flight response, what we traditionally know as the fight or flight response, and a little bit about the fear chain response. This is going to be a bit of an oversimplification and a really big condensing of this material, so I'll give you some other books to read on to give you a more expansive view of the topic. So we're going to look at fight, flight, freeze, and faint. And again, typically, most of us growing up hearing of the fight or flight response. There are a few more options than that I've seen throughout my law enforcement career and throughout my experience as a self-defense trainer. So fight, we know what that looks like. Flight, running away, we know what that looks like. Freeze. Freeze probably is the most common response that I've seen in my law enforcement career and among the people that have come in for training after something really bad has happened. They will freeze. They'll hesitate, right? And very often I hear, I didn't know what to do. Some variation of that, and this probably is the most common response that I see to a sudden violent attack, at least for some duration at the beginning, if not something that carries through until the unfortunate end. And then faint. My experience is that's pretty uncommon. People do pass out, people do faint, but with the degree of stimulation that's going on in the body, I really find that to be relatively rare. So factors that are contributing to this, kind of what go into how we react to a violent encounter, how we react to a very high stress situation. Experience. So certainly someone that is used to experiencing violence may react to it in a more set way because they've got that experience to rely on. So if they experience a lot of violence, they may disassociate, they may depersonalize, they may kind of withdraw in from that, but they also may be much more ready to respond to or initiate, should it become necessary, a violent encounter. Training, relative training, and efficacious training. I always express that efficacious training is what we're going for. So all training, right, is there, but does it specifically reach the desired results, which for us is how to respond to a violent encounter, how to defend ourselves. Training makes permanent, right? Practice makes permanent. So whatever we're training to do, that kind of becomes our set response. So we want to make sure that we're doing something that really is going to lead us to the end game that we want. And then mindset. Certainly we will be better able to respond to a violent encounter or a sudden attack if our mind is adjusted to that possibility and ready for it when we go out and about. And if you watch our other video on the decision cycle, we'll talk a little bit about how this factors into the decision cycle as we go. So the fear chain response, what kicks that off? How does it get going? And what can we do with it, right? So the startle response is often the beginning of the fear chain response, not always, but often. So three things cause the startle response: falling, sudden approach, something shows up right in front of you, and loud noises. So if you go to watch a traditional horror film, they use sudden approach and loud noises. That's a scare, right? So that's what they get out of the startle response. Now that is completely out of our control. It's completely automatic response. And you'll see most humans do a few things when the startle response hits. If we're standing, we'll drop our center of gravity, our hands will come up, often our mouth will open, we'll scream, kind of make a loud noise, and everybody knows what that startle response looks like, right? Well, split seconds following that startle response, we'll have what we commonly call an adrenaline dump, but we should understand that it's a broad endocrine response, broad hormonal response. There are many more hormones involved in this response than adrenaline. There's a lot of stuff going on to get your body into a state that it needs to be to respond to a violent encounter. Psychological factors, physiological factors that come about because of that broad hormonal response. Now, it's important to remember that a lot of this is out of our control. This just happens to us, right? This is an automated response. What we do with it certainly is within our control and can be modified due to training and experience. So the psychological factors, our gross motor skills will typically get much better. So we get much better at running away, at fleeing. We get much better at gross motor movements, flailing arms, flailing our legs, without training, I'm saying. So those big gross motor movements, we get a lot better at those things. So our body does get much more capable physically of meeting a threat or fleeing from a threat. Changes to sensory processing. How we process incoming sensory information is changed quite a bit. We may experience audio-visual distortion. So we may experience kind of mild hallucinations in terms of how we process visual input, how we process auditory input. I've heard people say they heard things that didn't happen. They heard voices that weren't there. Police officers often report when they've discharged their weapon, they're not hearing their weapon discharge. So we have some distortion, some modification of how we process or don't process that sensory input. Also, what I call the time warp. Many people recall processing time as passing very, very quickly at lightning speeds, or very, very slowly. Like they feel like they're stuck in mud. You know, their feet are just way down. They're having a hard time moving, or their perception of how fast they're able to respond is distorted. The shaking or trembling that often comes with a big hormonal response. Our hands will shake or will tremble. We'll hear our voice tremble. So we hear all of those things, we feel all of those things, and again, that's a response that is very often out of our control. Now, we can mitigate how much we're hit by this response through experience and training, but certainly we're all going to be subject to it to one degree or another. Touch on fine motor skills. Forgot to pass. Don't want to pass that up for you. While we have that big improvement in gross motor skills, our ability to flail, to fight, to flee, those things are there. Our fine motor skills typically degrade, and from an evolutionary standpoint, that's not really something that we need. So we're talking about like the ability to dial a cell phone, our ability to put our key into a keyhole. So those small motor skills will certainly degrade. Now, that doesn't mean that that's permanent. We can, again, counter that degradation in our fine motor skills with training. Now, look at bomb techs. They're certainly under a lot of stress, but they're using those fine motor skills, right? So going back to fight, flight, freeze, and faint. Now, certainly if you've watched our video on the decision cycle, you know that our order of operations is avoid a violent encounter, flee from a violent encounter, and then escalate. So fight, flight, freeze, or faint kind of fits into that. If we faint, not much we can do about it. If we freeze, right? Think about the decision cycle in terms of observe and orient. When we freeze, we are stuck between that observe and orient kind of a phase. We can't get on to the decision point, and we can't get on to the point of acting because that's where we're stuck. Now, very often in Krav Maga, we'll see people hit that. They'll have kind of a trauma trigger during training, and they hit that freeze point, and we start to work them through it. Over time, we typically see that go away. We certainly see it reduced to a great extent. Reality-based training is another training platform that I like to use because it really helps people learn to move through the decision cycle and to deal with things like, oh my God, my response is I want to run away, or my response is I want to fight, but I don't know how to do that, what skills to bring to the table, or I'm freezing and I don't want to do that either. So using reality-based training, we can often help people work through those things and build efficacious training that allows them to get through that process, right? So going back here, we know we're going to have a startle response. It's automatic, right? It has nothing to do with how tough or how brave you are. This is just a response. The same with the adrenaline dump. We're all going to have it, right? Experienced law enforcement officers, military, we all have some form of that adrenaline dump. But we know that it affects us less over time as we get training and experience, or rather we can cope with its effects more efficiently. And then we go to the physiological process, again, response. We know that's going to be there, and that's okay. But we've got to learn how to deal with that through training, how to put that to use. A couple of books that I recommend that you read. I want you to read The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. Great book on fear, on understanding fear processes, how to use it, how to cope with it. Another great book that I like, it's somewhat off of that topic, is called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and it talks about subconscious processing, or processing a kind of higher order processing that happens without our direct control over it. Really good book to read on that. What we have to understand is that fear is an automatic response, right? It's an emotion. Fear kicks off all of this fear chain, and that really is a good thing. So we can use that fear, we can use all of these things to make us better at responding to violent encounters or responding to very high-level threats. That is within our control. That is a decision, and that is one that we can put into motion long before they happen. So guys, as always, if you have any questions about the material that we covered here, feel free to ask us in the comments or message directly. And a lot of times that ends up being stuff that we cover in future videos. So we really appreciate those questions coming in. For now, take care of each other and stay safe.